Last one. Welcome to the final recap episode to review a few shotguns I missed during the series, starting with 1994's Alien vs Predator. You get dozens of aliens thrown at you, but the problem is they all take 3 hits to put down, so this shotgun doesn't feel very powerful. The impact feedback is not bad for a game of this era. Aliens flinch half the time when hit and have satisfying death animations, screaming and splashing acid blood in your face if you get too close. Sadly, it's just way too simplistic to give any higher praise. Disruptor! The AM Blaster is a cool looking twin barrel sci-fi shooter on the original PlayStation. The weapon has an impressively weighty kick to it, pushing you back on each shot. Enemies react well and go down in 1 or 2 well-placed hits. The secondary charge-up double shot is great fun, adding some tactical play like jumping out from cover with a knockout punch. The sound of each shot type is excellent too, very crisp. I had a lot of fun with this one, and it's a bit of a rare collector's item these days.
Anti-gravity.
Realms of the Haunting.
Shotgun. Winchester. M1897 slide action 12 gauge shotgun, to be exact.
I love the effort they put in to digitize a 12 gauge Winchester for you to blast mythical monsters. Its animation is actually pretty decent. Shame the projectile feels way underpowered and the muzzle flare looks too fluffy. Enemies have lackluster reactions to taking damage, which kills the satisfaction. These were the early days of FPS games, so you can't expect too much. Alien Cabal. This is really basic stuff here. The shotgun actually feels slightly okay to fire, with a passable muzzle flash and enemies that go down in 1 to 2 hits, so they got that right. The sprite looks really poor though, even for a pixel limited game, and it sounds terrible. Let this serve as the last example of a DOS-based FPS game, as Doom and Quake blew these out of the water years prior. Hacx, Twitch and Kill. So this is a relatively unknown official add-on for Doom 2 that began life as just another total conversion mod, but indeed had a commercial release with id's agreement. Here's the shotgun, called a Tazer for some reason. I'd say its model and animation are a downgrade on Doom 2, which is disappointing, but I do admire the impact on enemies and their reactions. The audio and visual effects are very satisfying. One problem is it's underpowered, often requiring 2 or 3 shots to drop the lowest tier enemy, and having such a huge weighty sprite on screen makes that feel worse. Bigger is not better here. We also get a super shotgun replacement with this weird looking Cryogun later in the game. Using the same shell ammo, it's definitely got more impact and makes cleaning out monster closets more fun. Its placement on screen actually screws with my sense of aiming though. I often grazed enemies. There's not enough animation or weight to each shot, again at odds, now with the bigger impact you're dealing. They should have reversed these 2 weapons in fact. X-Men, the Ravages of Apocalypse. Sticking with the Total Conversion mod theme, here we have the first featuring a high-profile IP using the Quake engine. Once again, it's since been made freeware after its commercial release. And once again, it's a downgrade. You start with this gun, inexplicably, and I love the animated weapon selection as this model morphs into different weapons. It looks really neat. Problem is, every enemy is a chore to fight, complete bullet sponges, with only the occasional stagger during your dozen-round volleys. It renders this gun a complete waste of your time. Hades 2. When this game isn't throwing your aim around when taking damage, it's making you second guess if you landed any hits on enemies with near non-existing impact effects. While the model looks terrible, I'll be very generous and give it credit for the automatic shell loading animation. Could have done with a few more frames to make it really work though. For everything else, it's way below par in each category. The Suffering. The shotgun looks ugly and really not what you'd expect from a true FPS game, but aside from that, it's a good performer. Enemies were a bit of a chore to deal with until finding this weapon. Suddenly, the game becomes enjoyable, as you can now stop these innovative enemies in their tracks in an instant. You can even stun-lock the bigger foes too, which is a relief as multiple enemies start to fill your screen and you need that ability to control the situation with a good aim. The Suffering ties that bind. 1 year later and the pump action returns. Same as what you get in the original game really, but we get a much better model and slightly nicer shot sound this time. The Sawn-Off double barrel is best when dual wielded and you'll get them both straight away, so let's forget that awful single weapon reload. Yikes. The breach snapback is nice when dual wielding, but overall it's below par for an FPS in 2005, something you wouldn't notice in third person perspective however. Again though, we have great enemy impacts and reactions, plenty of dismemberment and sense of satisfaction that you can have a fair fight without reactionless bullet sponges. Shotguns really do make the world a better place, and these two are slightly above average offerings from a predominantly third-person game. Chrome SpecForce. The model looks nice but is posed really badly, with lackluster animation too. Generally okay impacts and enemy reactions are on display, with some armoured fellas being a bit too bullet spongy.
There should be a key card on one of the cards.
It's got a tight spread, but I found it to be pretty useless at mid-range, so best running close like a madman. He is the same gun from the original 2003 Chrome, slightly different model and slower fire rate, but functionally identical to what you get in SpecForce.
Take him down.
Overall, I found this to be a pleasant shotty, but that animation needs sorting out, as it all feels way too lightweight. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth. It's pretty nice to fire this one after hours of tedious stealth missions. Killing these fishmen monsters is quite satisfying. They exhibit great damage states, visibly moving with difficulty after taking a hit. That's great to see. The weapon model and animation is just passing the bar here. Nothing spectacular, but nothing janky either. Condemned, Criminal Origins. Ew, what a mouldy old looking model. That's a mess. The The melee is its most interesting aspect as it can suffer 2 levels of damage as well as block attacks. Enemies stagger very nicely in this game, which is a big plus point, so there is some satisfaction. It just needed more oomph in the actual projectile and sound when firing. The same goes for the Sawn-Off shotgun you find later. It provides exactly the same effect, just with a much nicer model that's posed way better on screen and with 2 shots maximum. This one gets bumped up to a 6 out of 10 just for looking way better than the other one. Kinda feel bad when this one breaks now. Condemned 2's pump action gives us pretty much the same as the original release with a much nicer model this time, but also made it gigantic on screen too. You win some, you lose some. Overall, a nicer shooting experience with these excellent enemy reactions being the definite high point. This Riot Gun is the third of 3 shotguns from the Condemned games and also blocks a massive chunk of your view. All have the same impact on enemies, but this one most notably gives us more ammo to play with. The double barrel has model work that's nothing to write home about, and the lack of proper reloading animations is balanced out by the neat ammo check. If we could get the great reactions of enemies from this game into a more polished FPS, that would be a real winner.
Daddy.
So for these last 4 Condemned shotguns, they all score 6 out of 10 each. Ladies and gentlemen, behold! The worst FPS I have ever played. Absolute 0 impact effects or reactions from enemies. Just shoot the thin air the monster occupies until their health bar runs down. Now the shotgun is mostly getting 1-hit kills, so you don't see the lack of impacts as often, but just look at the death animation. It's inexplicable and the same for every enemy. Just garbage. The slimmest of praise goes to the easy upgrade system that also adds a blue muzzle flare when maxing the damage. The weapon model is comically simple and, while the animation is smooth, the forestock doesn't even slide. But those enemies, my word, renders the whole shooting experience null and void. Blacksite gives us a really cool looking and well animated alien energy shotgun. It really sounds the part too, with a great sci-fi charge up shot sound. Problem is, the gunplay is completely unsatisfying due to a near complete lack of impact effects on enemies. Limp death cycles, terrible environment collision meshes, and ridiculous screen shudder, leaving you disoriented in every battle. The thing itself is gigantic on screen, and the recoil animation obscures your entire right hand side, a complete waste of your already narrow 60-degree console port field of view, making it even harder to tell what's going on in the heat of battle. It's best used in charge up shot mode only, as you'll be torn to shreds if you try to take on multiple enemies at once.
Returning fire!
I tried to bounce a few shots around walls, but it's very rare this came into play. The levels were just not designed with this in mind as you move from set piece to set piece. There's some decent environment destructibility going on with cover objects, but those dodgy collision meshes made it all superficial. Overall, I feel this serves as a good example of focusing on the wrong side of an FPS in development. pretty looks and sounds won't get you very far if the interaction with the enemies gets left way down the list of priorities. I originally omitted the 3 S.T.A.L.K.E.R games as the guns were real-world replicas in a real-world setting, but I didn't realise how many mutant enemies there were alongside the human soldiers, so here it is. Well, we weren't missing much, I'll say that up front. Looking at the most up-to-date version, in Call of Pripyat, the shooting experience with these shotguns was way below par. The worst part is the impact on enemies, or lack thereof. It's badly done, almost no flinching, staggering, or any real satisfying audio-visual cues confirming hits. They just act like nothing's happened until ragdolling to the floor with zero expression. All 5 shotguns in the game feel floaty light to shoot and seriously lack impact. Occasionally we see some passable enemy flinching, but more often than not they just take the damage with no consequence before ragdolling to the floor. It was 0 score territory for a long part of my playthrough. I will give a shout out to the zombie humans who writhe around on the floor and need putting out of their misery, otherwise they'll get back up again. That was a welcome touch. All these shotguns sound wimpy to fire, and while it's nice most of these can fire alternate slug round ammo, it doesn't have a big enough impact on enemies to feel impressive. No reward for having a sharp aim. I really hope the upcoming S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 will focus more on the gunplay and less on fetch quests for NPCs. I truly do wish them the best, but these shotguns all score a below par 3 out of 10. No Man's Sky. In 2017, a major update for this game added the Scatterblaster multi-tool upgrade. It's pretty basic by FPS shooter standards, with the usual basic attribute mods available. Each tool has different aesthetics, but the Scatterblaster functions the same. Organic targets display some grief at being shot, but are insta-ragged the moment their hit points reach 0. A universe of floppy ragdolls. I feel like I'm being trolled at this point. Robot foes offer a bit more destructibility, thankfully, which is satisfying and visually appealing. There's still hope. Far Cry 5, Lost on Mars. These shotguns are the epitome of style over substance. They sure look pretty, and sound half decent too, but my word, all these shotgun variants feel atrocious in combat. The projectile is too slow with a near useless ricochet. And as for damaging enemies, it's like shooting concrete over and over, even with the one weak spot they show off. When you do kill them, guess what? Immediate jiggly multi-limbed ragdolls. No satisfaction at all. This is lazy AF enemy design and makes playing this DLC a chore. The increased spread of the Bulldozer variant barely makes a difference. The Hellfire makes things marginally better with a higher chance of exploding enemies, but it's still no real fun. I don't know how many times I've said this now, but please, AAA developers, design some satisfying gunplay first before dressing up your fancy planets. These 3 shotguns are woeful shooting experiences.
You got issues you need to work out, man.
Now for something different. Here come the indies. I've been careful not to include very small indie games in this series. They're usually very low scoring and I don't want to slam aspiring developers, but these were some FPS single-player games with shotguns that caught my eye. Time Rifters. It's basically an auto shotgun of which you can customize its projectile with various attributes. It's a neat shooter but has no oomph, and unfortunately, even with its pleasing art style and puzzle-esque gameplay, leaves me feeling very underwhelmed. Monument. Oh my, look at them tubes. Must have taken a good 5 seconds to extrude those. It's scraping the barrel but does just enough right to make it ever so slightly fun, mostly thanks to the various reactive enemies. Crimson Metal. I appreciate the animation detail with the guns in this game, and most enemies go down in 1 to 2 hits, which always has some satisfaction to it. I was pleased to see dual wielding here too, although the screen kick is so much it's hard to keep your aim. This Strange Realm of Mine. If they had just added some stun locking or flinching when you shoot enemies, this would have scored a bit better. It is fun to use, and the projectile actually feels satisfying to shoot. It's well made in that respect. Everything else is just too simple. Doomed. Now take Crimson Metal, remove what little that had going for it, and what you get is doomed. It's playable, but I don't know why you would want to. Dark Places is a wretched attempt at a survival horror. Well, I did survive this horror show of a game, so maybe there's some meta stuff going on here. The shotgun is one of the worst on this extensive list. Revulsion. I actually had some fun with Revulsion. Voxels sure can make for an interesting visual style, but I think they would have done better to make the enemy's environments destructible with these. Would be great to see a bunch of voxels permanently detach following shotgun blasts. As it is, it's just a superficial gimmick. Each shotgun sounds decent and looks neat enough considering the art style. I'm not impressed by the enemy bullet sponge nature, particularly when using a double barrel at close range. It's a familiar feeling of letdown when you don't get so much as a flinch out of a regular enemy. We do get some blocky jibbing at the least. There is some fun to be had here though. You do get nice audio and visual effects confirming hits. The shotguns in this game all score a not so bad 4 out of 10. Of all the indie games, this is the one I'd come back to. The Pit Infinity. One word, sluggish. That's how it feels shooting the shotguns in this game. The muzzle flash is terribly slow and all the model animation has this stuck-in glue feel that's hard to convey in words. Shooting anything with either of these guns doesn't feel satisfying at all. The enemies don't help either, with 0 reactions to being shot, they just keep coming for you. Look elsewhere if you want a proper FPS game. Some clarifications for you now, as I purposely omitted a lot of the big name games from this series, as the criteria for inclusion is focused on single player campaigns where the developers designed fictional weapons. This channel is about celebrating great weapon design and innovative enemy engagements. I am not interested in showing you 100 versions of a S.P.A.S.T.12 from countless military sim shooters. This series would get very boring very fast otherwise. Games that do feature replicas of real world weapons only get included if the setting is a fantasy with innovative enemy creations. Firstly, and it's odd I even have to say this, but I only review finished games. Early access titles don't cut it, as they may well change the weapons or enemies before release, and I'm in no rush to include unfinished experiences. I guess Cyberpunk 2077 was my only forced exception there, cause, you know. The Call of Duty and Battlefield campaigns that didn't get a mention all have real-world weapons and real-world scenarios, so don't get included in this fictional weapon series. Far Cry 2, 3, 4 and 5 main games don't get included as they're all real-world replicas. Only the original Far Cry games, Blood Dragon and Lost on Mars add-ons got included, as we get monsters in the originals and fictional shotgun designs in the latter two. Postal 2's guns are crude real-world replicas in a very dated looking but very much intended realistic setting, so it's not part of this series. I only cover zombie shooters if the guns are fictional creations. There's just too much repetition here otherwise. Games like Left 4 Dead, Dead Island, Dying Light and countless other zombie wave shooters are all based on real world replicas, so don't feature. Special kudos for Left 4 Dead 2, those zombies were pretty dynamic. Hellgate London, predominantly a third-person action RPG with a customizable character appearance, it's not a true FPS. I even tried playing solo, but it's a gigantic grind due to the fact it was never designed to play alone, so for those reasons, it's not included in the list. The guns would be very low scoring for an FPS in any case, so we're not missing anything. Devil Daggers. This one falls under hand-projected spells of sorts, so not a shotgun, but just wanted to mention these spell-casting shot types are not included in the series. For the completionists out there, a handful of games have weapons with a spread shot that I don't consider to be shotguns. A few examples for you like Heretic, Strife, Kiss Psycho Circus, and Operation Matriarchy. Basically, if there's magic involved or an odd energy source that's not using shells, it's possible I'll categorise that as a different weapon type for a later series. id Tech Zero and fixed Y-axis shooters. You won't see those early prototype FPS games lacking vertical aiming and level design on this channel. I threw in Alien vs Predator at the start of this recap episode as a one-off to show you how limited these games were in that genre embryonic state. I feel it's unnecessary to critique weapons from those games, like criticising a child for not being an adult. I don't cover older handheld devices like the GBA and PS Vita, as the limitations of these devices cripple the FPS experience. As much as I like Quake 3 Team Arena, games like these don't offer a proper single player campaign. I included a couple of predominantly multiplayer games such as Unreal Tournament 3, as they put a lot more effort into their single player story. Just offering death matches against bots is not enough.
Riot Gun. Target destroyed.
Team Fortress 2. Obviously this one doesn't have a single player campaign and doesn't get included for that reason, but a lot of you love this game and just want to see it acknowledged, so here it is. Before I conclude this series, a big thanks goes to these essential resources that have allowed me to play and capture the older games on modern systems with a 4K native resolution. At the beginning of this process, I spent months installing so many patches, editing so many .ini and config files, running compatibility at the OS, CPU and GPU levels. It was such a grind at times to make any progress, I almost gave up on the whole project. Pretty much every game was bought and played on original hardware, with one notable exception, the purchase of an official Amiga emulator license to play Alien Breed 3D2, a very rare early 3D FPS seen in episode 1. Finally, thank you for watching, commenting and supporting me on this journey. Watch out for a new deluxe supercut of all FPS shotguns, as well as the brand new weapon series coming soon. Please consider supporting on Patreon. I love it!